It is the 23rd of April, 1964, in an elegant flat in central London. A distinguished man in his 50s sits in a comfortable drawing room. Around him are books and old paintings in gilded frames. He is one of the most respected art historians in the world. He advises the Queen on her private collection of paintings. She has made him a knight. He moves through the highest circles of British life. Across from him sits a quiet man from the security service. The officer makes him an offer. If he confesses, he will never be prosecuted. No trial, no prison, no public scandal. Full immunity in exchange for the truth. The art historian is silent for a long moment. He rises and pours himself a drink. He asks the officer for a few minutes. A few minutes, he says, to wrestle with his conscience. He stands at the tall window, looking out over the rooftops of London, and then he turns around and admits that he is a Soviet spy. His name is Anthony Blunt. He has served the Soviet Union for nearly 30 years. And in a few days, he will walk back into Buckingham Palace and carry on advising the Queen. Because Britain has just decided to keep his secret, it will keep it for 15 years. This is the story of the man they would call the fourth man, a Soviet spy at the very heart of the palace, and the cover-up that protected him long after everyone who mattered knew the truth. To understand how extraordinary this is, you have to understand who Anthony Blunt was. He was not a shadowy figure on the edge of things. He was the establishment itself. He was born in 1907, the son of a clergyman. He was clever, elegant, and effortlessly charming. He won a scholarship to Trinity College, Cambridge. He became a brilliant scholar of art history. In 1945, he was given one of the most trusted positions in the country. Surveyor of the King's pictures and later the Queen's, he was put in charge of the royal collection of paintings. He held that position for 27 years. He was welcomed into the palace again and again as a trusted friend. He walked the private corridors of Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle. He handled priceless works of art that belonged to the crown. He became director of the Courtauld Institute, one of the great centers of art in the world. His scholarship was genuine, and it was brilliant. This was not a small man hiding in the shadows. This was one of the most admired minds in the country. His book on the painter Nicolas Poussin is still regarded as a masterpiece. Students and scholars across the world looked up to him. In 1956, the Queen made him a knight. Sir Anthony Blunt, he was, by every outward measure, a pillar of British life. And the whole time, he was working for Moscow. The betrayal had begun decades earlier at Cambridge. In the 1930s, the university was full of clever young men who felt the world was breaking apart. There was a Great Depression. There was mass unemployment. And across Europe, fascism was rising. To many idealistic students, the democracies of the West looked weak and doomed, and the Soviet Union looked like the future. Blunt was elected to a secret society called the Apostles. It was a private discussion group of the university's cleverest men. Many of them were drawn to communism, and Soviet intelligence was watching them closely. The Soviets understood something patient and clever. They did not want spies who already worked in government. They wanted to recruit brilliant young men before their careers even began, then wait for years as those men rose into power. Blunt was one of them. He was recruited to work for Soviet intelligence, and he became a talent spotter. He picked out other clever, disaffected young men who might be turned. He helped build a network that history would call the Cambridge Five. 5 brilliant young men spread across the heart of British life. One would reach the top of British intelligence. One would work in the Foreign Office, and one would end up in Buckingham Palace, caring for the Queen's paintings. When the Second World War came, Blunt joined British intelligence. He worked inside MI5, the security service itself, the organization whose entire job was to catch spies. And from the inside, he handed its secrets to the Soviet Union. He passed thousands of documents to his handlers. He had access to the reports that flowed through the security service. He could see what Britain knew and what it feared. He even had access to intercepted foreign messages. Part of his job was to watch foreign embassies in London. He knew who was being followed and who was not. He passed that knowledge straight to Moscow. He told Moscow what the British knew about Soviet agents. He told them what German intelligence was doing. He was trusted completely. And he betrayed that trust completely. Here is the part that is hardest to grasp. During the war, Britain and the Soviet Union were allies, but Blunt kept spying long after the war ended. As the alliance turned into the Cold War, he stayed loyal to Moscow. Then, in 1951, the network began to crack. Two of the Cambridge spies were about to be caught, Guy Burgess and Donald Maclean. British intelligence was closing in on Maclean, but before they could arrest him, both men vanished. On a spring night in 1951, they slipped out of England. They fled to the Soviet Union, and Anthony Blunt had helped arrange their escape. The disappearance was a sensation. It was obvious there had been a warning from inside. Suspicion began to circle the men who had known them at Cambridge. It circled Kim Philby, a senior intelligence officer, and it circled Anthony Blunt. Blunt was questioned again and again. He was calm, charming, and gave nothing away. There was no proof, and so he kept his position, kept his knighthood, and kept advising the Queen. For years, the case against Blunt went nowhere. Then the truth arrived from an unexpected direction, from America. There was a man named Michael Straight. He was the son of a wealthy American family. As a young man, he had been idealistic and drawn to the same beliefs. He was a wealthy American publisher. He had studied at Cambridge in the 1930s, and there, Anthony Blunt had recruited him as a Soviet spy. In 1963, Straight was offered a government post in Washington. It would mean being investigated by American security, so he decided to confess before they found out. He told the FBI everything. He told them that Anthony Blunt had recruited him. At last, British intelligence had a witness. In April of 1964, an MI5 officer confronted Blunt and offered the deal. Immunity in exchange for a full confession. Blunt took it. He confessed that he had spied for the Soviet Union for decades, and then Britain made a quiet, deliberate choice. The men who ran British intelligence were themselves part of the establishment. Blunt was one of their own kind. He had been to the right schools and moved in the right circles. Putting him on trial would mean admitting the rot reached the palace itself. It decided to keep the whole thing secret. There would be no trial. There would be no announcement. Blunt would keep his job in the palace. He would keep his knighthood. He would keep his reputation. The confessed traitor at the heart of the royal household would simply carry on. Even the prime minister of the day was not told about the deal. The Queen herself would not be told the full story until 1973. When she was finally told, she is said to have reacted calmly and without surprise. She continued to allow Blunt to carry out his duties, as if nothing had changed. It was a very British kind of silence, polite, discreet, and utterly determined to avoid a scene. And for 15 years, the public knew nothing at all. For those 15 years, Blunt kept working quietly with British intelligence. He was interviewed many times about what he had done and whom he had known. He gave up some names and almost certainly protected others. He remained, in public, Sir Anthony Blunt, advisor to the Queen. Secrets like this are hard to keep forever. Rumors moved through London, through journalists and writers. Everyone in a certain world seemed to half know. In 1979, a journalist named Andrew Boyle published a book. It described a Soviet spy hidden inside the establishment, behind a false name. He called the spy Maurice. He could not name Blunt directly for fear of the law, but he laid out the clues for anyone to follow. A brilliant art historian, a Cambridge man, a figure close to the royal household. But everyone who read it began to ask the same question. Who was Maurice, really? The pressure became impossible. And on the 15th of November, 1979, the new Prime Minister stood up in the House of Commons. Her name was Margaret Thatcher, and she named Anthony Blunt as a Soviet spy. She revealed the confession, the immunity, and the 15 years of silence. The country was stunned. Within hours, Blunt was stripped of his knighthood. Sir Anthony Blunt was simply Anthony Blunt again. He was removed from his honorary positions, and the press descended on him like a storm. A few days later, Blunt did something almost unheard of. He agreed to face the press. In a crowded room in front of the cameras, the exposed spy answered questions. He was pale and he chain-smoked, but he was composed. He did not beg for forgiveness. He described his betrayal as a matter of conscience. A choice, he said, between loyalty to his country and loyalty to what he had believed was right. He had chosen his beliefs over his country, and he did not seem to regret it. For many in Britain, that was the hardest thing of all to accept. Not just that he had betrayed his country, but that he had been protected, honored, and kept close for so long. A traitor who had advised the Queen on her paintings, while the people who ran the country quietly looked the other way. Anthony Blunt spent his last years as a recluse. His scholarly reputation was destroyed. His name was quietly removed from honors and institutions. He died of a heart attack in 1983, at the age of 75. But the strangest part of the story is not what Blunt did. It is what Britain did about it. For 15 years, the country knew it had a confessed Soviet spy inside the palace. And it chose to protect him. It protected him because exposing him would have been a humiliation. A scandal at the heart of the establishment, reaching the royal family itself. So the men who ran Britain decided their reputation was worth more than the truth. They gave a traitor immunity and let him keep advising the Queen. Anthony Blunt betrayed his country for an idea. But the cover-up that followed was not about ideas at all. It was about protecting the powerful from embarrassment. To this day, no one knows the full extent of the damage he did. No one knows how many secrets he passed, or how many agents he betrayed. He was never tried, so the record was never fully opened, and that is why the fourth man was allowed to hide in plain sight. In the palace, among the paintings, for 15 long years, the most dangerous place for a secret is not a foreign country. It is inside the walls of the people too proud to admit they were fooled.